Approval to move forward with voter-approved insurance of up to $140 million.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. That is issuance, voter-approved issuance of up to $140 million par amount E-SPLOST backed bonds. This is an item, of course, that it relates to the voter-approved E-SPLOST V referendum that took place on May 24th. Within the body of that referendum, as you all know, the voters approved the school district issuing up to $200 million in E-SPLOST backed debt in order for us to get started earlier on the various projects within the E-SPLOST V program. What this item does, it gives the superintendent the authority to take the necessary steps to begin validation of this debt. In Georgia, validation is a legally required step for the sale of governmental, local governmental tax-exempt debt. Like in Florida, it's optional, but in Georgia, you have to do it. In order to commence validation, and I think there's a requirement, we have to commence validation within 6 months of the ratification of the vote of May 24th, okay? Validation is a process whereby you get your bond counsel and your financial advisors together, and they fill out the appropriate documentation, and the school district will go to the district attorney of DeKalb County and request that he or she sue us in Superior Court to test the validity of what we're doing in relation to this bond issue. It's very normal. Okay, I've been through, I guess, probably 50 or 60 validations in my career. The only thing that could happen is you could have an intervener. I've had 2 interventions in my career, won one, lost one, where someone can stand up in court and say, I object for this reason, Your Honor. The judge takes it under advisement and ultimately will come back and rule there's a problem or there isn't a problem, okay? It's a standard step, but it is legally required in Georgia. We're requesting that y'all authorize the superintendent to take the necessary steps to move forward to commence the validation. It doesn't say you can't turn back, okay? The way that we would go forward into validation, probably get no intervention, probably get the go-ahead, put the team together and take electronic bids on a day, probably in January or February in the first quarter, hopefully get 7 to 8 bids, and the lowest true interest cost bidder will be recommended on that day to the board to accept the bidder, okay, to deliver $140 million worth of bond proceeds into the school district's accounts. And on closing day, that delivery will take place, and the monies will be in place to take care of what Mr. Brantley and Mr. Williams need in order to go forward with their projects before the sales tax money actually commences. What's a little unusual about this is, you know, the E-SPLOST V money will start being collected on July 1st, 17. We are authorized by the vote to sell the bonds before that cash flow commences. And in the resolution that the voters voted on, they also authorized the inclusion of capitalized interest. So we will upsize the bond issue a little bit to pay interest on itself, okay, until that sales tax money starts, and then the sales tax money will amortize these bonds. I think the last principal payment is in July of 2022, which is also itemized in the resolution that the voters approved. So that's what we're requesting. Your action today is to move forward and authorize the superintendent to take the necessary steps to commence the validation.
Thank you, Dr. Bell. Is there any discussion? Mr. Jester?
So for our last principal payment, roughly after 5 years after taking these bonds out, and did I read correctly where it's $30 million roughly for the annual debt service for this?
No, sir. I think that language was approximate. The actual, right now, you got to understand, when you capitalize interest and you structure a 5-year, this is essentially a short-term issuance. Even though it's bonds, it's a 5-year issuance because the principal and tranches were enumerated in the resolution, okay? The highest annual debt service amount under this present structure is $35,481,800, okay? So you will have principal and interest payments of about $35 million a year.
I'm sorry?
It's P&I, so it's principal and interest.
Oh, yeah, right, principal and interest.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha. So what did you say, the interest amount?
The highest P&I amount that we have under our latest scenario is $35,481,800,000.
And how much of that is principal and how much is interest?
Let me see here.
A lot of principal and a little interest.
Well, because it's a 5-year issue, yeah, and because the principal tranches are enumerated, I don't know if I got hang on.
I was just trying to calculate how much this is going to cost.
The total cost of the issue under current market conditions, okay, the total payback will be $148,833. Excuse me, $148,833,000.
So roughly $8 million.
Depends on how the premium lays into this thing, and please keep in mind, in 2012, we sold $33,300,000 worth of SPLOST bonds. They produced $37 million worth of income, worth of proceeds. Why is that? These types of bonds are marketed with a premium on top of par. You're going to have a $10,000 bond in here that'll be sold at 105%, 108%, okay? 90% of these bonds are going to go to pension funds or insurance companies. There is a tax break that those institutions get when they buy these bonds at a premium. Right now, there's not a lot of bonds like this out there in Georgia, and you're going to have a lot of people that are going to want to get these bonds in their portfolio at a premium, at more than 100 cents on the dollar. That is where the overall generation of a premium on the overall bond issue is going to take place. When to actually produce $140 million, I think really right now in the current market conditions, we would have to market about $128,790,000. That would be a $12 million premium that'll come in with that, okay? If we sell 140, you're going to be way up in the 150s, okay, if the premium conditions persist. Now, what could change that? You got a presidential election, okay, you've got the world situation. The short-term market would have to take so many hits that premium relationship would go away. We don't see that happening, okay? We feel pretty confident that you're going to continue to have a premium come through with this bond issue. As we get closer to pricing day, there'll be an electronic marketing sheet that'll be put together by advisors, and they'll kind of lay out those maturity tranches. And at the bottom of the page, they're going to calculate the true interest cost for each one of the bids. Right now, our estimate and their estimate is the true interest cost on this debt will be like 1.6%, okay, under current market conditions at an A+ rating. 1.6. You may say, why? You know, that's really low. Yeah, it is, but this is just a 5-year issue. It's not like it's a 25-year bond issue, okay?
For the sake of argument, would it be possible to, instead of using the bonds, using one of the funds from our surplus, whether it's the capital outlay or general, is that even legal to do something like that? Do you know, Ms.
Well,
Hackemeyer?
I'd have to defer to Ms. Hackemeyer or General Counsel in that regard. The voters did give us the authority to use sales tax money, okay, to do these projects.
Doesn't mean we necessarily want to if we think it's cheaper to loan ourselves the money and save that $8 million, for the sake of argument.
Yeah, I understand. You know, we've taken a number of years to rebuild our fund balance. This is more than our present fund balance. If you would try to do these projects using that fund balance, and so it wouldn't be advisable, in my opinion, particularly where you have this revenue stream that's already coming in that the voters have authorized.
Well, that's currently more than the fund balance for the general, but we have a $272 million in the capital outlay surplus.
And some of that fund balance is already in SPLOST.
Right, and it's earmarked for projects currently going on and whatnot. So it's just a thought, just throwing that out there. Thanks.
Mr. McMahon.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Bill. In the rationale, it says that we have amounts totaling $140 million. I know we have $200 million capacity to issue. Do we have like a list, or do we know the facilities that we're trying to fund with this $140 million? And if so, so yes, we do have that. What
I would defer to Mr. Williams, but I think facilities and IT have a list of the projects that they want to execute using the bond proceeds we're talking about.
Yes, sir. The anticipated $140 million in bond proceeds will be used to support district-wide initiatives specifically related to technology enhancements, school bus purchases, HVAC replacements, roof replacements, as well as other facility improvements across the district, to also include the new facilities that are needed in support of our Cross Keys cluster. A large part of this will certainly be supporting the secondary feasibility support that's coming forth, and we're working through that process. The specific project detail related to that component will be presented to the board in November for a first read as it relates to our E-SPLOST list coming up for the board's review and final approval.
The reason I ask is, will we limit ourselves by only issuing $140 million? Would it be prudent to authorize a larger amount, and if we only needed 140, utilize what we only need? Because if, as the board authorizes and approves this moving forward, I guess my concern is, are we limiting ourselves to this dollar amount? And if we need additional funds later on, I suspect that we will incur additional fees for a second tranche if needed. I don't know, it's kind of high level, but.
Yeah. Well, I think we had that discussion, and still it's a point of this conversation with regard to, I know we factored in EPR with that as well, and I'll defer to Mr. Brantley. Do we have enough room for not only the things that Mr. Williams mentioned, but also making sure that our new system that we're going to bring online for finance and personnel will still have enough room for that?
Yes, part of that money, and I believe $20 million was earmarked for it, for our ERP system from a financial standpoint to get started. Of course, you know that's a 2-year process, so we want to get started right away. But the other portion of that money was actually geared toward refreshing our computers. We're at, last time we did that was 2013. And so we're at that point again, and considering the demands on online testing that are coming, along with numerous other demands from a technology standpoint, that's what is being used for. I think we do. I worked that out with Dr. Bell in a meeting, I believe on last Friday, and I think we have enough with that amount.
No, I support the bond issuance.
This is whether we're
Right. So if everybody's good, right, then I'm good, and I'd just like to have some further clarity of what we're using these, and we're good. And I just didn't want us to limit ourselves if we had additional needs come about, because we do have, and to take advantage of this incredibly low rates. It's amazing. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Orson?
So just a couple of follow-ups to that. I want to make sure I understand that. So your net interest value, you said the net interest cost is about 1.6%, or about $2 million against the 140 after you factor in the bond premium.
Okay, what I exactly said is the true interest cost.
Right.
In the business, there's true and net and average.
Okay.
We, in the United States, for the last 15 years, have been measuring these things by TIC, true interest cost.
So that's essentially after you've netted out whatever bond premium we would get. Does that, because you said $128 million issued to get $140 million of proceeds. That's $148 million of what we'd pay out, but you seem to be factoring, I know it's all complicated math, that at the end of the day, am I correct that you're estimating over 5 years it would cost us about $2 million to get $140 million of bond proceeds?
Approximately, you're kind of blending the premium with the bond proceeds.
Right, I know, but for lay people out there, they just want to know what it costs them
Yes,
at the end of the day. So, okay, so the related question, I think, to Jim, if the size of the offering went up to 200, is that what the maximum authorized? Could we anticipate any savings because the market would allow us to get a better position, or would it not make a difference? Is that if we issued the full 200 million, is there a further discount in our benefit that might be baked in there as one of the considerations?
From an interest rate calculation point of view, Mr. Orson, I don't think there's any inherent economic benefit to move from about 140 million to 200 million, okay? Please keep in mind that when the rating agencies look at this, they're going to ask for the project list. They're going to look at our fund balance because, as you notice, these are GO/SPLOST bonds. Right. Georgia's an intercept state, which means that the first level of security is going to be the sales tax revenue stream that starts up July 1st, okay, for SPLOST V, okay? But if, for some reason, there's some difficulty in sales taxes covering this, the state of Georgia, and we say we've got a problem paying it, the state of Georgia can intercept our QBE money, right, and they can give the money to the trustee, okay? But there's a number of states that have, like Pennsylvania has that, Georgia's an intercept state. But when we call these GOs, you're going to get the better interest rate because what we're going to say is the first level of security is the sales tax stream. However, we will authorize the levy of a debt service millage, and we will act on it. We won't act on it at first. We will act on it if for some reason our sales tax money is deficient. Okay, we did that in 2012 with the $33 million. There's a provision in there where y'all pledged that you would levy a debt service millage, which you don't have now, in the event there's some deficiency. Just making that pledge is helping to knock down this interest rate to 1.6. And just making that pledge helps us get a higher credit rating out of the rating agency. So that's why the GO is important in front of SPLOST. But I don't see any inherent econometric advantage in going up to 200.
Okay, so that was one last comment, and I guess it's a little bit on what Jim was talking about. In a very low interest rate environment already, I mean, I think that it's weird, you know, normally you're not advocating for more debt, but I also don't want us to miss a window where it allows us to leverage into more stuff, particularly since some of the plans that operations have on the table in the community are in excess, you know, they're more expensive than we had anticipated based on the planning for SPLOST. So would that allow us any more flexibility by allowing us to stretch with the additional $60 million of debt? That if we were to go, say, the plan A or option A, that's $247 million rather than $166 million. I want to make sure we're not, I think, curtailing and constraining ourselves unnecessarily when we have an opportunity to leverage the marketplace.
Okay. We have been authorized by the voter to go up to $200 million by the specific tranches of principal in the resolution, okay? We could validate the 200 and still just go forward on the 140. Could certainly do that, okay? That, you know, is a cautionary move. If some unanticipated situation occurred, you know, then you don't have to revalidate. You don't have to go back and start, okay? I defer to the superintendent in that regard, but.
Sure. So I think the intent was that the 140 was based on what we felt from a cash flow standpoint that we needed to have the capacity to issue the contracts necessary in order to be able to move the program forward as soon as we possibly can. The intent is that the sales tax revenue will collect roughly about 100 to 120 million each year. So we're only talking really about a 6-month period of time that we're accelerating to get the benefit of having projects completed maybe 2 or 3 years earlier than what they would have been completed if we leverage a cash flow basis as we did for SPLOST 4. I think it would probably be a good idea to consider validating the full 200, and then as we get closer to that time, maybe then have a more definitive, you know, number, if you will, that we can always come back and say we issue maybe 160 if that's what we feel is more appropriate. But right now, based on our internal analysis and our review of the preliminary expectations for the program, we feel that 140 is more than enough. But however, I think it will give us the ability to increase it in the event we feel we need to do that closer to the time that we issue the bonds.
Mr. Brandley, you concur?
Yes, sir. I'll never say no to money from a from a technology standpoint because it changes so fast. I think if we do go ahead and validate the 200 million, as we start to move along with our projects and we see that we're moving rapidly, it's a little bit different than Mr. Williams because we don't have all those natural factors to take into consideration. But we absolutely could use it to move a lot further ahead on our projects to get things out if it's validated. So yes.
Hearing that, then I, as a superintendent, want to amend the 200 million, and with the understanding that we feel comfortable with the actual being right around the 140 million.
Do we need a vote on that? But
You want to go ahead and vote to amend the item, and then again, vote to determine whether or not you want to put the amended item on the consent agenda.
Well, the voters have already authorized that in their vote. And what we're deciding here is to go forward with validation up to 200 million, which the court is going to say, well, with the vote, we see the voters have approved that. If there are not any other technical issues, I think the court would probably say, sure, this is valid, okay? Then as we get a better project list on all the various, there'll be a sizing done. Our advisors will look at the market, look at if interest rates move. They'll resize the issue, and they'll come back and say, okay, you've got a need for 152. You can gain that with the premium input at 138, and we recommend you go at 138. But you still will have the ability to go up to 200 if for some reason down the road you need it. It ought to already be validated. But again, I would defer to General Counsel and Bond Counsel when they're brought on board. But I don't see any problem with doing that. It's just an option. We're not compelled to do 200 million. We're not compelled to do 100. Right now, we can stay with where we are. But there is, Mr. McMahon has pointed out, there's probably some benefit of going through the courts once at 200. But again, I would have to defer to counsel when we get them on board.
And I bring that up because I'm thinking that Mr. Williams and Mr. Brantley have had time to think about this 200 million, and why wasn't this offer brought forth earlier of 200 million? Because I was in agenda setting, and we've had time to go over these numbers.
I think we feel comfortable that the 140 will accommodate what we're seeking. I think the only difference is the possible opportunity to leverage the current market to get more bang for the buck if you validate the full 200. But we right now, we feel comfortable that 140 will suffice.
I'm getting 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other. Do you want to go 200 or do you want to go 140?
We want to validate 200.
200.
We certainly want to validate 200, yes, sir.
Okay.
The issuance is what we were referring to, that will confirm whether we issue up to 200 or not is the question I think that we have on the table now.
Right.
But yes, we certainly want to validate the 200,
Okay.
correct.
no further discussion at this time. I call for a motion to amend, I'm sorry, to amend the agenda item to read 200 instead of 140 million. Validation. Moved by Mr. Orson, second by Mr. McMahon. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, a call for the vote?
Call for a vote on
Yeah,
the amendment.
on the amendment only.
And Mrs. Turner's voting
Mrs.
yes.
Ms.
She texted me.
Okay, yes. Okay, so now, is there any opposition to placing the amended item on the consent agenda for this evening? Hearing none, this item will be placed on the consent agenda for this evening.